It was like witnessing a bomb being set to detonate. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The murder witnessed around the world which sparked a global backlash against what has been the status quo. Something felt like it broke, but rather, we've been collectively awakened to what has been broken since the beginning. Maybe we were forced to look towards an evil we have all been diverting our attention from its very inception. It was never meant for black people, this American dream. How do you attach humanity to a sentient being considered not whole but 3/5 of a human being? No justice, no peace became the soundtrack and a takedown to yet another monument dedicated to the Confederacy. As we reject certain aspects of the status quo represented by these figures, it puts to question if there ever has been peace in a country built by violence. Knowing that personal wealth, land, and power are accumulated in only one fundamental way: through the murdering, maiming, coercing, stealing, robbing, or the exploitation of others. We're currently living in a time where we are questioning, what does it mean to be American? Who are these people in which we build for and glorify their legacy? Hamilton is a historical revisionist telling of the life story of
Alexander Hamilton,
one of the founding fathers of the United States. Its creator and star, Lin-Manuel Miranda, retells the tale using rap music and lyrics. Hamilton, being an immigrant himself, was born on the Caribbean island in Nevis, following the highs and lows in his scandals, revolution, and death in a duel at the hands of the US Vice President. Response to the musical has garnered rave reviews and critical acclaim. Recognized by institutions like the Tonys, Grammys, Kennedy Center Honors, and while also receiving many other kinds of accolades from 2016 to the present year of 2020, for its quote-unquote revolutionary achievements. First, for melding the world of hip-hop into the realm of musical theater, an artistic staple of Lin-Manuel Miranda. His past musical hit, In the Heights, is a romance that depicts first and second generation Americans of Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Latin American descent trying to survive and thrive in a contemporary Manhattan, speaking to the gentrification of Black and Brown communities. It is clear to see that Lin's work is dedicated to telling stories that include a diversity of cultures. This will lead to the second achievement of his career, which is the casting of Hamilton. The founding fathers, who are historically, biologically white men, are all portrayed by Black and Brown actors, demonstrating this endeavor and ambition to provide more opportunities for artists from minority communities to tell stories on a platform that aren't always readily available for them to do so. In a book of collected essays called Historians on Hamilton, How a Blockbuster Musical is Restaging America's Past, Renee C. Romano states in her essay, Hamilton, A New Civic Myth, that Hamilton simultaneously broadens the traditional American narrative to welcome and even center people of color who have been marginalized in America's civic myths. The genius of Hamilton lies in its ability to offer both those who have long owned the narrative and those who have been excluded from it a place in America's foundation story.
But could this be true? Is it possible for marginalized communities to be able to reclaim their own narratives by telling and portraying the stories of the founders of their continued marginalization? In order to understand how one can reclaim a narrative, we must define what that narrative has to be in order to be received as such. Narratives are split in two distinct categories.
The first category is called dominant or master narratives, a portrayal of the dominant claims of neutrality, objectivity, colorblindness, and meritocracy as camouflage for sustaining the self-interest of powerful groups in society. This is everywhere in all kinds of media, like books, movies, magazines, theaters. It is all around us. By naming social identities as natural or normative of our society, many forms of media privileges those who are white, cisgendered, able-bodied, men that are middle and or upper class, and heterosexual.
NANI? We'll get to that one, I promise.
With Jonathan Groff cast as King George III, we can establish that this deliberate choice in casting is symbolic to the normative points of references. The king is depicted as cisgender, heterosexual, white male, at the highest peak that one can possibly reach in class, and as the other characters within Hamilton being depicted by racial minorities. This juxtaposes and invokes the symbolic and historical relational dynamics between the dominant and marginalized. But at what cost? If the argument one makes is that the bodies of the actors are important in telling the narrative of the story, are the characters of Hamilton that aren't the king people of color? If they aren't, then what is the point of racializing their depictions?
Could somebody please make it make sense?
The character of King George III not only establishes the dominant narrative symbolically, but also literally embodies dominant narratives in which the marginalized communities are trying to deviate from within society in real life. The casting choice of white actors calls attention and exploits the real relationship with marginalized communities both outside of the story and within their depictions. But by having those communities be involved depicting their historical elite white oppressors, is that deviation even a possibility? Does this casting choice correlate the struggle of Hamilton to those that are minorities? Why call attention to race at all? Is this a story about race?
Try again.
This story is about
Alexander Hamilton,
who is undeniably white. By exploiting the physical identities of the actors to make this real-world distinction, as an audience, we are given a choice to make. We must either choose to ignore their identities in order to follow the story, or if we do acknowledge their identity, we must ignore the narrative because it wouldn't be the story of Alexander Hamilton anymore. What choices do the actors have to make in order to play these characters? What are they being asked to deny or leave behind in order to participate in this story? The second category of narratives are called counter-storytelling. This is an ethos of telling the stories of those people whose experience are not often told.
Wait.
What?
We cannot break bread with you. You have taken the land which is rightfully ours. Years from now, my people will be forced to live in mobile homes, on reservations. Your people will wear cardigans and drink highballs. We will sell our bracelets by the roadsides. You will play golf and enjoy hot hors d'oeuvres. My people will have pain and degradation. Your people will have stick shifts. The gods of my tribe have spoken. They have said, do not trust the pilgrims, especially Sarah Miller. And for all these reasons, I've decided to scalp you and burn your village to the ground.
The musical of Hamilton does not have characters that identify with marginalized communities. Therefore, it does not acknowledge the voices of marginalized groups of people. The musical is dedicated to telling the legacy of
Alexander Hamilton
and the founding fathers, not of the people whom they oppressed. It is not enough for black and brown people to be the figureheads of historical white men just to be seen as something that could be considered a counter-narrative. So when they rap,
Immigrants, we get the job done.
They are not talking about the present brand that we have attached American immigrants of today, but of the white colonizers like Hamilton who settled to North America from the Caribbean. And this question is important. What specifically in the text of Hamilton makes it so that these characters must be depicted solely by people of color?
Hey, whoa, in the greatest city in the world, in the greatest city in the world. I've thrown away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot.
Hey, but we'll never be truly free until those in bondage have the same rights as you and me. You and I, do or die.
Well, just as I thought, trash.
All right. So, imagine when the public rights for Hamilton are out for the public to mount at theaters everywhere. Of course, after the global pandemic, ask yourself this. Would there be a difference in experience if the story was presented to an audience with an all-white cast? And trust me, if there were productions of an all-white Wiz or Hairspray, which, by the way, only since June of 2020 was it prohibited to mount an all-white production of Hairspray, this is all in the realm of possibility. Even in the Heights, Lynn's own property was whitewashed by a professional theater company in Australia. This obviously shouldn't be produced in this manner, but it doesn't mean that these theater companies won't try. However, this time they kind of have an actual ammo against those that frown on these uninclusive decision making. There is nothing in the script that says that these characters have to be of a certain race. Our production just so happens to have an all-white telling of Hamilton, so we can tell it as historically accurate as we can. Is that so wrong? So on the flip side of things, a Kent State University theater program produced a play called The Mountaintop, written by Katori Hall. It is similar to Hamilton by being a revisionist play of historical figures, respectively. The Mountaintop is set the last night before the assassination of MLK inside the Lorraine Motel. In this particular academic production of Hall's work, Michael Oatman, a black male theater director and a professor at Kent State University, made the conscious decision to cast a white male actor to play MLK. His reasoning behind his decision was that he wanted to test Dr. King's message as a social experiment to see if his words can actually live beyond race, a message that is exemplified by MLK in his famed speech.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Katori Hall,
Whom we stand?
Oh, we stand.
We stand.
Oh, we
I stand. Oh, we stand.
Who We Stand, wrote an article for The Root recounting her thoughts and investigation coming across her work being misrepresented in this manner. The casting of a white king is committing yet another erasure of the black body. Sure, it might be in the world of pretend, but it is disrespectful nonetheless, especially to a community that has rare moments of witnessing itself, both creatively and literally, in the world. The white actor was indeed sharing the role with another black actor, but the fact that this mystery actor has remained nameless further demonstrates the erasure of the black body in this experiment. Even on the school newspaper website, only the white actor's name is listed. Katori further expands her research, reporting that this mysterious black actor never actually made an appearance on stage for the entire run of Kent State's production. I wonder why.
It was all a lie. Guys, it was all a lie. She lied.
So, my girl Katori actually had a conversation with Michael Oatman, where he continues with his original talking point that this was all a social experiment and that he wanted to start a conversation. But these words fail when you find out that there were no talkbacks that were scheduled to measure the success of Oatman's experiment about racial ownership and authenticity. How many finger quotes can I do in this video? Oatman, in an interview with the Washington Post, defends his decisions and remarks, "Let's remember that we are now in the post-Hamilton era, which suggests to the narrow-minded that roles meant for people of color can now be played by white actors if traditionally or historically white characters can be played by actors of color."
Don't be rude.
Are you kidding me?
I swear to God.
Ignoring the fact that Hall's work, specifically in this play, was meant to humanize the image of Dr. King, which was clearly not understood and distorted by Oatman's self-serving interests, less focused on how he used Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton as a false equivalent counter-argument in order to justify casting a white man in a play about the image of MLK without addressing the consequences and implications of his casting choices. It is disappointing to read about a black man that doesn't understand how he further added to the erasure of black people, his own community, in their own stories. Take accountability for that. At least part of Hamilton's success, the part that we stand, is because it attempts to address the lack of opportunities for people of color in an industry that privileges white people and addresses it directly. Back to Hamilton.
Renee continues in her essay. On the one hand, Hamilton's music and casting choices have the effect of de-linking whiteness and the story of the nation's founding. However, traditional national origin stories have focused on the experiences and perspectives of elite white men who are celebrated for promoting ideals of liberty and equality they did not follow in practice. People of color, whose histories these myths often ignore, have been offered only the option of celebrating a history that encourages and even demands an innocence or amnesia about the nation's history of racial and gender exclusion.
So, we have been talking about what has been happening on stage, but now I think I need to also address what's happening backstage. The creative team comprises of Howell Binkley, the lighting designer, Andy Blankenbuehler, the choreographer, Thomas Kail, the director, David Corrins, the scenic designer, Alex Lackamore, the music director, orchestrator, and co-arranger, Charles G. Lapointe as the hair and wig designer, Nevin Steinberg as the sound designer. Y'all, this doesn't look too good.
Let me check the costume designer real quick. Oh, thank God. His name is Paul Tazewell. But as seemingly revolutionary as Hamilton is on the surface, you can see that Hamilton fails to actually provide spaces behind the scenes, as all but two of the accredited members, including Lin-Manuel Miranda, are people of color. Now, I understand that these people aren't solely responsible and that they all have crews beneath them. However, it is something to note that the people who are credited for creating the experience of a hip-hop musical doesn't represent the people who originated the genre they're pulling from.
When we first dove into Hamilton, one of the things that I loved about the score was that Lin had written these themes that repeat all through the show. And so I knew that we needed to find a vocabulary, a physical vocabulary, that also pulled these themes through the show. One of the biggest ones is in my shot, just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. So that was a phrase that I wanted to make really special and very repeatable. And we do it lots of different ways in the show at lots of different times. So here's a look at what that step looks like. So we're in second position, like in the spirit of the American people at that time, nice and strong. We're reaching out as if we're gesturing to all those people over there, all those people over there. Then we lean hand to heart, so it comes up almost like a Pledge of Allegiance, like the birth of the Pledge of Allegiance. So it goes 6, 7, and just like my country, I'm young. The hand flips out, scrappy and hungry and.
So as you can tell, parts of the choreography calls attention to and are referential to the Pledge of Allegiance, which we can further discuss whether or not these gestures in itself are symbolic to the indoctrination of Americans of pro-American propaganda.
In 1892, a Christian minister named Francis Bellamy wrote an early version of what became the Pledge of Allegiance, a loyalty oath to be recited by the people of the United States of America. It had no official standing until 1942, when in the midst of World War II, the United States Congress adopted this pledge, albeit with slightly different language from the late 19th century version. In 1954, it changed once more to include the words, "under God." With the Cold War in full effect, many Americans distinguished themselves from the Soviet Union and their so-called state atheism with a renewed Christian zeal. Official national anthems and pledges are common enough, but what is uncommon is how the Pledge of Allegiance is utilized in public schools in the United States. Children recite this loyalty oath once a day, every day, for their entire childhoods. Kindergarten, middle school, every day begins with the Pledge of Allegiance. Reciting a loyalty oath to the nation is seen as bizarre, creepy, even cult-like from the perspective of people living in other countries. Canada does something at least a little similar. Schools play the national anthem, not a Pledge of Allegiance, over the intercom, but nobody is expected to sing along, and O Canada is not a loyalty oath. The Australian version of a Pledge of Allegiance was phased out years ago, and most other countries in Europe do not practice this in schools at all. Apologists for the Pledge of Allegiance for children say that this is a harmless bit of civic pride, but there are a few problems with that. For one, it's mandatory, and children will get in trouble for not saying the Pledge of Allegiance. For another, children cannot possibly be aware of what they are normalizing in themselves at such a young age. And for another, apologists say that this is not actually a loyalty oath, but a pledge is a synonym for an oath, and allegiance is a synonym for loyalty. So let's not split hairs here. To Americans, the Pledge of Allegiance is unquestioned due to how early everyone is taught to recite it and how normalized it becomes for each individual. If nobody actively questions it, then it may never occur to an individual to think of it as anything but benign. If someone calls it what it is, indoctrination, Americans get defensive because it is so common to them, so normal, that criticizing this totally normal thing feels abnormal.
So, people of color are dancing symbolically, pledging their allegiance to a nation that doesn't really care to acknowledge them in a show that doesn't acknowledge people of color either, and will use elements of their culture to tell stories that aren't related to them.
The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter by 14.
Meritocracy is the system in which the talented are chosen and are moved ahead on the basis of their achievements. A failure to reach success is blamed on the individual's failure of not working as hard as those who are successful. What is strange to me is that Lynn wrote the characters of In the Heights to each have different relationships to the English language, to money, to education, and to opportunities, and to the United States. In the Heights presents a complexity of minoritized experiences, while Hamilton celebrates European colonists as patriots for turning stolen land into a new nation. In the Heights is a critique of the violence of gentrification, an ongoing urban process of displacing Black and brown people from their homes. It is colonization by another name. If the Constitution in the musical world of Hamilton is the same as the American Constitution, Black people weren't considered equal. They were 3/5 of a human being. So, who is this message really for?
Alexander Hamilton is one of the unsung heroes of our country.
Let me get out my girl, Renee.
Conservatives have still found much to praise about Miranda's portrayal of the Founding Fathers. The musical has, much to their delight, made early American history and classic texts like the Federalist Papers hip again.
Howdy do, fellow kids.
Hamilton's portrayal of Hamilton, Jefferson, and the other early American figures as complex and morally flawed also pleased conservative commentators because it served, as they saw it, to mitigate against the knee-jerk criticism of them as dead white men who should be dismissed as hypocrites. A writer for the National Review hoped that Hamilton would help people who were reared on a public school revisionist history come to understand why many still believe this dead white man is worthy of veneration. At a time when many conservatives have complained that America's first leaders, as Rush Limbaugh puts it in 2014, have been wrongfully caricatured as homophobes and bigots and racists and sexists, conservative commentators view the portrayal in Hamilton of vibrant, energetic, and human founders as entirely earnest and deeply sympathetic. There has been this criticism of Hamilton on Broadway that because it was so widely popular, it was nearly impossible to see. A single ticket could go for hundreds of dollars, and orchestra seats on Broadway sold over $1,000, which caused people to question how accessible Hamilton really was.
Theater in America is hard to access anyway, but Broadway even more so. For one thing, we're a big country. Assuming you can't get to Manhattan or don't live in a major city, you might have trouble finding a theater that is big enough to host something like a Broadway tour in the first place. Even if you do, it still costs money, with really good seats going for probably about $200 at least. Perhaps an even bigger barrier is the one that prevents people from even looking in the first place. The perception that theater, Broadway especially, is only for the upper class. Surely this is an overly simplistic stereotype? It's not. I've read several of the Broadway League's executive summaries for their annual demographic reports, and there's not a lot of change from year to year. There's certainly enough consistency that I can confidently tell you who the average Broadway theater goer has been for the past decade. A 45-year-old college-educated white female tourist who sees 2 or 3 shows a year, plays a bit more than musicals, with her annual household income of $200,000. From here on out, I'll be pulling numbers from the 2017-2018 report. So, the idea that Broadway is just for rich people? It's not unfounded. The average annual household income of the Broadway audience is quite high. Is this because of the occasional Bezos skewing the average with an extremely high outlier? Actually, yeah, the average, or mean, is not really a good indication of wealth distribution. Because of filthy rich billionaires, the number is always higher than most actual households make. The median, on the other hand, gives a more accurate representation of typical income. It's the middlemost value. So when the Census Bureau says the 2017 median household income in the US was just over $60,000 a year, they mean that 50% of the population made more than that and 50% made less than that. Yeah, you didn't think you were gonna get statistics lessons in this musical theater video, did ya? The median household income of the Broadway audience is somewhere between $110,000 and $125,000 a year. So Broadway attendees make almost twice as much as the average American household.
However, Gene Denby's NPR article, Watching a Brown Hamilton with a White Audience, states that it isn't necessarily that Black audiences aren't able to spend the money on Hamilton, because they will. In fact, he further iterates that because theaters have a long tradition in history of segregated seating and plays chock full of racist caricatures, meant Black folks in particular never warmed to Broadway. Y'all, I know that Lin-Manuel Miranda is not obligated to be a historian and has full artistic liberties to pick and choose what facts to include and fabricate things to add drama to his story. It's not the inaccuracy that bothers me personally. It's the kinds of inaccuracy that are deliberately included that brings all the questions to Lin's yard. What is the point of having a character that represents the voice for the abolition of slavery, who symbolically dies next to Hamilton on stage, and then soon after imply ambiguously that it is on Hamilton's grocery lists of work that he needs to accomplish as a way to remember and honor not the slaves, but John Lawrence's legacy?
Tomorrow there'll be more of us.
Alexander, are you all right?
I have so much work to do.
Which he never does. Is this moment supposed to imply that Hamilton is an abolitionist for slavery? What does writing a battle rap number in which Hamilton disparages Jefferson for owning slaves do for the character of Hamilton within the story, as the real Hamilton participated in the buying and trading of slaves? Does this moment serve to put the morality and ideals of the character Hamilton above Jefferson's character as a moral person by leveraging slavery as a prop for his argument? And why is it important to note that Eliza, at the end of the story, becomes a voice for the abolition of slavery?
I speak out against slavery. You could have done so much more if you only had time.
She never actually was. An article written by the staff at the Schuler Mansion about Hamilton and his relationship with slavery offers a select option as to why he did not write passionately about slavery and abolition. It should not be lost that it is still very clear that he was in fact not passionate about slavery and abolition in any way. Hamilton did not write about slavery abolition because, despite his passion, he did not want to get in trouble for an unpopular opinion. In which case, one would think that personal letters to those who shared his passion would show the passion that his public writings did not. Elizabeth Hamilton, or another family member to whom the papers were passed, did not save Hamilton's writing on slavery abolition because they were deemed unimportant. This is unlikely, as America was then headed towards the Civil War, and slavery was a clear and building issue from the start of the Revolution. Or it was because they were lost. Elizabeth Hamilton, or another family member to whom the papers were passed to, intentionally discarded or destroyed Hamilton's writing on slavery in order to alter the historical narrative. which is very probable because Eliza and son John Hamilton have redacted and rewritten many passages and letters of Hamilton.
I'm erasing myself from the narrative. Let future historians wonder how Eliza reacted when you broke her heart. You have torn it all apart. I'm watching it burn.
Although they tried, there are records left of letters written to one John Lawrence.
Cold in my professions, warm in my friendship. I wish, my dear Lawrence, it might be in my power by action rather than words to convince you that I love you. I shall only tell you that till you bade us adieu. I hardly knew the value you had taught my heart to set upon you. Indeed, my friend, it was not well done. You know the opinion I entertain of mankind and how much it is my desire to preserve myself free from particular attachments and to keep my happiness independent on the caprice of others. You should have not taken advantage of my sensibility to steal into my affection without my consent, but as you have done it, and as we are generally indulgent to those we love, I shall not scruple to pardon the fraud you have committed, on condition that for my sake, if not for your own, you will always continue to merit the partiality which you have so artfully instilled into me.
Alas, gays, it was not meant to be, because this is not a story in which we exist in. So how does all of this tie in which we perceive and engage not only with the characters of Hamilton, but the real life Hamilton and their mids?
My love, my love, my love. You love my lady loves. My heart, my heart, my heart. My hearts, they got you.
This was an aspect of the Mountaintop I really admired when reading Hall's work. Reading Martin's struggle to write his speech, riddled with paranoia about the government spying on him, all while being stressed about the pressure of carrying the face of the civil rights movement, the play purposely puts Martin in a position that had him fail to live up to the image we are all comfortable seeing him as. It was really humanizing. And this is not to compare whether or not one art was better than the other. I just want to highlight the difference between the objective goals behind each work. We can all agree that these plays are not trying to tell something historically accurate, but by using historical facts, settings, and events, these two pieces of work are attempting to find a truth, an essence, and feeling of their respective time in history that may still carry over to our present timeline. Hall's work aims to recognize MLK as something we all forget when we put him up on that pedestal. Some will use his image as a tool or martyr in order to push a narrative. But at the end of the day, he is a man. Lynn wants you to take away that Hamilton's legacy transcends himself. His reach is further than everyone. Yes, he made mistakes that are tied to his own humanity, but ultimately, he is portrayed as someone that embodies the spirit of the American myths and its meritocracy. He works harder, he was smarter than everyone around him, and that's why he deserves to be remembered. He is entitled to it because he worked for it, and he earned it. Is that any different from the monuments that are erected to commemorate the Confederacy?
Is Springfield really better off ignorantly believing that Jebediah Springfield was a great hero? Has his myth really brought out the best in everyone? The lesson Lisa is meant to learn in this Frank Capra-style ending is that even though she finds freedom in the truth, others might not. And that's a fair bit of knowledge itself, except that ignorance and mythology about the past often limits the freedom of many people. It is something to keep people less free. Coddling Americans about what the United States really was and really is does a disservice to the people who are harmed by this ignorance. Lisa doesn't want to hurt the feelings of Americans, but what about the feelings of those who suffer because of this mythology? The parade is filled with soldiers whose pride is intertwined with that of Jebediah Springfield. National mythology and an unearned feeling of righteousness allows conflicts to rage across the world unprotested by a people who assume their people must be the good guys. Their mythology tells them so. The episode chastises Lisa in the end for being, well, a spoilsport, and has her change her mind to let the audience know the message of the story. But Lisa was right in the first place, before she changed her mind. A community is not better for deifying their leaders, their founders, mythologizing their past. It's propaganda that is time and time again used for political goals, often against marginalized people. Your comfort is not more important than the truth if the lie is weaponized to hurt people.
Is Hamilton really as revolutionary as these institutions claims that musical to be? And what kinds of messages does it actually push forward? What progress is there if people of color, specifically Black people, can't play themselves and can only be empathized standing next to or through them emulating whiteness? By choosing to write around real historical Black and brown people in lieu of celebrating their white colonizers, all while depicting them through Black and brown actors, is this really a step forward in the right direction? And that is where I have to stop. But there are so many different aspects to delve into with Hamilton that I may have to make a second part to this video on the very important aspect of this show. How does Hamilton utilizes rap and hip-hop, Black culture, and is it appropriative? But I've asked far too many questions in this one, girlies, so let's give your humble hostess time to get a drink, okay? I deserve it. All research is linked in the description, and as well as charities and organizations dedicated to help Black lives. Please check them out. Like this video if you want, and maybe even subscribe if you like, and ring that bell, and wash your hands.